Association of Makers. And today our topic is university makerspaces. We've been talking to people that run library makerspaces, people run community makerspaces, and we wanted to look at universities who operate makerspaces largely for student work. And we're joined by folks from Rice University, from Bucknell, from UCLA, and from Cornell Tech in New York City. But before we begin, I'd like to invite Dorothy to say hello and share some news that she has.
Hi, everyone. So it's so great to see everyone. You guys might have noticed that we've changed the schedule just a little bit. We'll be having these conversations weekly on Thursdays. So we were having them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We shifted a little bit. We know folks are very busy and a little Zoom fatigued. So we'll be having these conversations every Thursday. Before we start with tonight's program, I wanted to make an announcement, which is that the Capitol Hill Maker Faire is on. And in just a couple of weeks, so on the 23rd and 24th of July, we'll be having the Capitol Hill Maker Faire. And although it traditionally happens in the halls of Congress, we're going to take it online like most other things. And so this year's theme is Making in the Time of COVID-19, which is very apropos for this group. And we're just exploring the impact of the ingenuity of makers to provide solutions and supplies in reply to the pandemic and communities across the United States. And we really want to have full participation across the United States because we are doing this online and it's completely free and open. It should be hopefully easy for us to get representation from makers around our country. And we really want to make sure that we still are able to showcase to our congressional leaders, both in the House and the Senate. We're doing this again in collaboration with the Congressional Maker Caucus, as well as the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And we'll have 2 days this year, which is really exciting. So the first day we'll have a panel series featuring leaders in making from libraries, museums, academic institutions, federal government, the private sector, you name it. We'll discuss the ecosystem of support for all the efforts that we've been talking about on this show. And then panels will also address the critical role of the maker movement in ensuring equity in education and the promise of our movement to create vibrant, inclusive, equitable, and responsive local communities grounded in social justice across the United States. So we hope that everyone can join us on the 23rd and 24th. I will drop the link into the chat. And we'll also be advertising it, obviously, on both Make's platform and on Nation of Makers. But we hope that you can join us. And the call for makers is still open. So please do enter in the call for makers and let us know if you want to participate. So again, the first day is panels, and I didn't say this, sorry. The second day is actually when we'll be showcasing our makers from around the country, and each maker will get an hour and a half of dedicated time. And we'll also be allowing for exhibits to be live the entire event and then afterwards. So they'll be live and available. Again, the hope is that our congressional leaders, as well as staffers and the public, will have access to information about the things you're doing. And that, along with all that we've been talking about on this show, will hopefully help to get some of the support that we're trying to advocate for makers around the country to continue to do these efforts and all the other efforts that you do in your day-to-day when it's not COVID time. So please help us celebrate the work that you're doing on the 23rd and 24th and either attend or participate. And we hope to see you there. And I'll drop in those links in a second. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dorothy. I think it's actually a wonderful time for us to, really try to highlight the value of makers as we're seeing in this. There's a wonderful video I put on MakeZine, but it's on Facebook. It's called Make Now Better. It's about a 4-minute video. A group out of LA with roots in South America put it together, and it's really a short video that showcases how people around the world, makers, are. I think its subtitle is how 100,000 volunteers made 1 million PPE, and it's pretty incredible showcase of what makers can do. Well, let's get into tonight's program and invite our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their context. So our focus today is on what happened to your makerspace once the university was shut down? Was it used at all for PPE production? And then later we'll come back and start talking about, well, where going forward from that, what do you think is going to happen? And particularly in helping students with design projects and others. We'll start with Niti Parikh from Cornell Tech. It's just on Roosevelt Island in New York City. Welcome, Niti.
Thank you, Dale, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Niti Parikh. I'm the creative lead for Cornell Tech campus Maker Lab. I was kind of brought in by Cornell University in the fall of 2016 when we were starting the campus for Roosevelt Island, which is a tech campus for graduate studies and PhD and postdocs in New York City for Cornell University. That meant the maker-led model, which it would exist here, is not going to follow any existing higher academic makerspaces, which were already in place at Cornell University. So what the Maker Lab here, which focuses in New York City, is for our master's and PhD students, it is just in-time education model with access to desktop manufacturing tools and actually a portal to the community outside of campus, which is a very key important thing which I have been focusing on since my day one here. Yeah, so that's what the lab is about up till in the 4 years of inception I have been here.
Yeah, and what happened in March?
Ooh, so there are a lot of different aspects of it kind of played through. Particularly, it was challenging for me because I teach a participatory design workshop in spring, which heavily relies on tools of Maker Lab, right? And after months of deliberation and outreach, we gather real challenges from the community. And teams in my class actually consists of not just Cornell Tech students, but of students of medicine from our Weill Cornell campus and community members from Senior Center and long-term rehab center on near our campus. So these people are involved in this class because they want to make things. They want to learn about the new technology and tools. And we were literally cut off in the halfway of the semester where we were just starting to prototype. So without going into details of it, we quickly had to adapt to really online tools, which luckily we were able to do it in terms of simulation in making and not being with the tools ourselves. So that's what happened from like March 16th onward till the end of the semester.
Okay, thank you,
yeah.
Niti. Let me ask Jacob Schmidt to introduce himself. Jacob is with an engineering makerspace at UCLA in Southern California. So welcome, Jacob. Thanks for being here. You need to unmute yourself, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm a professor in the bioengineering department, and basically the Makerspace at the engineering school is only 2 years old. So that was something that I put together and we opened for the first time in fall of 2018. When we got shut down in the middle of March, basically the next day we started making PPE almost full time. And we sort of did that to fill the gap between sort of like the anticipated shortage of PPE and when the UCLA health system. So we were not in the beginning, we weren't making PPE for the community. We were trying to supply UCLA Health, and UCLA Health is some kind of huge health conglomerate. And so I think they viewed us as being a nice short-term stopgap. And then once they got their bureaucracy and all their procurement people up and running, then they sort of took all that away from us, which was fine because they needed it at a much higher level. They were looking at 10,000 pieces a day. And so that's not something that the Makerspace could really handle. So we started making a few, I think I made maybe 1,000 a day of the Wisconsin shields in the beginning. And I was doing that for a couple of weeks until basically I ran out of all the plastic sheeting. So we couldn't get that in the Los Angeles area for a while. And so then that's when the procurement people at UCLA Health, they've got agreements with national distributors and stuff like that. And so since UCLA sort of took over production of their own PPE, there's a local PPE group called Combine.LA, and they're making PPE. That's all community crowdsourced, and then they were just distributing it to local hospitals and clinics. And so I've been doing a lot of printing of like headbands and stuff for face shields. And so
were students involved?
You know, a little bit, but not too much, because really nobody in the very beginning, when people were really freaked out, none of the administration wanted them there. And so you had to have waivers signed, permission to work on campus and stuff like that. So it was mostly me and a small number of people. You know, in addition to the PPE stuff, the Makerspace also was prototyping a bunch of new equipment. So we were 3D printing ventilator splitters, and we were also prototyping things, these PAPRs, the portable air-powered respirators. And so people were trying to figure out how to make them. And so because, you know, I mean, the typical use case for these is that they've got 5 or something like that in the hospital, because why would you ever need a lot of them? And so, and then suddenly everybody was out of stock. So we had a team of faculty and students trying to invent those things and make the PPE for those. And so it's been, at least in the spring quarter, it was really busy. But then since everybody sort of picked up the slack with the supply chain, the need for small scale manufacturing is lessened.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Amy and Matthew from Rice University. I know, Matthew, you were working on some ventilator projects and some other things as well, but talk about OEDK, right? Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm the executive director of the Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen at Rice. We basically service all undergraduate engineering design work, interdisciplinary at Rice. We're a 20,000 square foot academic makerspace. So we have rapid prototyping desktop stuff, but we also have full machine shops and wood shop and electronics lab and computer lab and whatnot. And we're also a little unique because we have dedicated workspace. So like what Niti said, we do projects, real world projects with real clients, and we have teams that work together. And so they will they'll get a table that they're reserved for the entirety of their project. And so it's a really neat space. And that definitely is going to bring in quickly in March, when we were told the students had to go home, it was I'm sure most of you had the same feeling. It was very heartbreaking to see those projects left behind and unfinished, and the students had to go to trying to finish them virtually and whatnot. But in doing so, we had a former project from a year prior that was a ventilator project. It was an automated bag valve mask that a student team did as a senior design project. And we started getting a lot of inquiries about it because people were getting anxious about needing ventilators. And so we brought on a team of faculty and staff to do a redesign for it so that we could put the plans open source and online for people to make themselves. We had a little bit of a hard time getting approval to have a student work, but we really needed a student to do the programming and whatnot. And so we got approval to have a student to work on. The team was about 7 or 8 people, depending. And it sort of took off. We put the plans online and you had to register to get them. And we had 2,900 people register to get the plans. We started getting pictures from all over the world. The registered people were from like 105 different countries. And, but we started getting pictures from all over the world of people making these things. And so quickly, what we ultimately ended up doing was we knew we couldn't take it as far as it needed to actually be a device that could help with COVID. And so we partnered with a manufacturer here in Houston, and they've done a redesign, and over a lot of hard work, we just got FDA approval for emergency use And so, yeah, we're super excited about it. And the design is great. It looks a lot more like an actual medical device now, but the innards are pretty much still the design of our original prototype. So I'm really proud of our team for what we did there.
Great.
And my responsibility at the OEDK is as an associate teaching professor. And so I handle education related to the engineering design process, as well as prototyping with the students. And when March came around, as Amy mentioned, all of the students were required to scatter. It was really hard for us to ask ourselves, how do you do hands-on learning and engineering design when everybody is distributed? And as Amy mentioned, it was very difficult to get even one student to be cleared to work in the space. And so there were two courses that I was teaching, one called Prototyping and Fabrication, which teaches excellence in hands-on and advanced manufacturing tools. And what we had to do was pivot to students making things at home and then relying more heavily on computation and on simulation. But there was one assignment that I did actually allow them to make, and that was design of face shields. And so I had them design a headband that I then laser cut and I test fit it. And I showed them with Sharpie and in a conversation where it did and did not fit. And then they were able to redo it. But the real challenge was in engineering, engineering design, introduction to engineering design, where these students are tackling real world projects. And then all of a sudden, they can't work on prototypes at all. And they have old prototypes that are just sitting on tables everywhere. And it was heartbreaking. But what we did that worked was we pivoted quickly to an online format using Zoom and Zoom breakout rooms to do sort of teamwork. And then we used documentation of make projects to sort of list what they did at the end of each team meeting. And by the end of the semester, some teammates who had specialized experience, like with electronics, we were able to order things and get it to them, or they'd already ordered it. And they were able to actually produce low fidelity prototypes and make some very nice oral presentations that communicated, sort of what they would have done if they had the time, or, how the device could be taken over by a subsequent team.
You actually brought up something that was interesting to me, which is I was thinking about equity, right? And how, you have students that are going back to wherever they live and they may not have access, part of them coming to college is getting that access, right, to those tools and equipment. So it sounds like you guys were a little forward thinking and being able to get them some of the materials they needed, especially for those design cycles.
Yeah, equity issues have been made very clear through this process in the spring, and I'm sure that everybody has dealt with this. We tried to think carefully and as inclusive as possible for everyone.
Thank you, Matthew. Amit, Jariwala is at the Georgia Tech and runs, I think, the engineering makerspace, or is the faculty advisor or whatever for that. Welcome, Amit. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dale, for having me, and I'm excited to be here. So my name is Amit Jariwala. I serve as the Director of Design Innovation for the School of Mechanical Engineering. We have around 26 makerspaces on Georgia Tech campus, at least based on the latest definition that we have had. Of those, a majority of those tend to be in the School of Mechanical Engineering. One of them is the Invention Studio, which is entirely student-run. I serve as the faculty advisor for that space. We also have some staff-run makerspaces, which are like machining malls, and some which are entirely TAs or student faculty-driven, which is the Idea Lab. So we have a combination of different types of makerspaces right next to each other for different purposes. And so when this COVID hit, we were obviously not able to provide access to the students who needed those, especially around 16th of March. So we couldn't have undergraduates actually enter in. We did have an option to have graduate students approved to help in with some of the COVID relief efforts. So we had some faculty who were really excited about design. And so we had some of them work on face shields and face masks. They were covered by the New York Times as well. Basically, they had feedback from the doctors saying that they needed 100,000 face shields within a week. And so there wasn't much time to design and iterate and actually do this manufacturing. So they just jumped onto doing all of that within the Invention Studio, got some of the graduate students who got approved to work on it. And they looked at the problem from not just being able to make something from a 3D printer, but really thinking of, can you mass manufacture it? Because the idea is if you can test that out, you can then involve other suppliers into the case. For example, headquarters of Coca-Cola right next door to us, they donated a lot of face shield parts, the PETs to us. So then we got that raw material, and talked with other manufacturers who have other tools, handed off our designs, and really got that manufacturing to scale up. So I think that was something we really enjoyed, that you could use prototyping to test out an idea and then mass manufacture it. So that was a very fast moving process. We have other faculty who do a lot of research on frugal innovation, and like Dr. Saad Bhamla, for example. So he was curious about what can we use locally to solve this supply chain problem, because it's not just a problem of a new product, it's a problem of how do you deliver this at a very rapid scale. And we had other faculty working on ventilator designs, less complicated designs, like no Arduinos needed. Can you use some of the mechanical design ingenuity to still get that feedback? So there were some projects that were going on. I used to get a lot of questions from our undergrads saying, when can we get in? We're so eager to help out. And we were so disappointed that we couldn't actually let them in. So we had this internal Slack channel, and all the designs that were being tested out, they would get heavily analyzed internally by these students who used to staff these makerspaces. So it was a good mix of, okay, do what you can do best, right? If you can analyze, do that. You can actually build it, help us build it. So it was a very good teamwork that we got to see. And so that was all ad hoc that just came around. But I also see coordination of courses, our freshmen all the way to senior level courses in design. So just as Niti and Amy were mentioning, we do get industry projects that students work on, real world challenges. And the positive side was, because this happened in March, when the spring semester starts in January, most of the low fidelity prototyping was done. So students knew early on what works and what doesn't. They were at a stage to actually build out the whole system and finally present it at the expo. That is something they weren't able to do. And so they had to rely more on analysis. And so that kind of was difficult, but we have Blue Jeans, for example, at Georgia Tech. It's an enterprise license, so students were able to still continue collaborating. And in fact, we were surprised by the ingenuity that students showed, because they were able to just make a small piece, ship it over to their friends, or just drive it out to their friends who would then work on the second iteration of the prototype. So that was really interesting for us to see. We never provoked them to do that, but they were able to use their own house as a tiny makerspace based on what they had already done before. So that was kind of what we have seen so far.
Yeah, on a previous episode of this program, we had Lee Witcher on. Lee is, I think, a graduate student and sort of also works in the Makerspace, and he did some really terrific work creating face masks, I think, and it was just marvelous to see. You know, he kind of woke up one day and said, "This is what I'm going to do." So I think it's remarkable. Well, let's go to our last a group from Bucknell University. We have Alan Cheville and Matt Lamparter. And Alan, do you want to start us off? Thank you for joining us.
Oh, no problem, Dale. Glad to join you. I'm at Bucknell University. It's a liberal arts, predominantly undergraduate institution in central Pennsylvania, about 3,500 students. And so essentially, you know, we got hit over spring break. Our president made the decision to close while the students were on spring break. And so everybody came home for a couple of days, grabbed their stuff and went home. It turns out that I teach the senior capstone design course, and we do projects with real world clients. And so Matt and I and my co-instructor, Stu Thompson, made the decision that we were going to ship the projects to students. We run a year-long capstone course, and we really pushed the students hard. They'd already gone through one iteration of their design and had a basic system working when the coronavirus hit. So they were far enough along that we could ship things out. And that's kind of who we are as an institution. We provide a lot of support to our students. We have 3 small makerspaces on campus. It's more of a network of makerspaces than one bigger space. And we run the electronic version. We call it the Makery, when we have sort of more arts and craft focus and innovation focused spaces in other parts on campus. And so that actually worked really well. Luckily, the students had time to bond as a team. They had well-defined roles. We assigned students as project managers who managed to keep the teams together using video conferencing. And although we didn't get the results that we had hoped for, we actually were very surprised at the level of effort the students were able to put in at home when we shipped them everything we needed. And that included test equipment in some cases. We decided if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right and just trust people to get that back to us.
Did you get it back?
We have. We have. I kept very close tabs on where things went, but yes, without too much pestering, things came back. Yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. So, right, I'm Matt Lamparter. I work at Bucknell as well. I am the lab director for the electrical and computer engineering department. And then in addition to my lab director hat, I also get to wear my Makerspace hat because my office is inside of one of those 3 Makerspaces. I live in the makery there. And so it's funny, I was remembering there as Alan was mentioning shipping things to students. Of course, this was the one year where we had a group that decided they needed an 80-pound conveyor belt for their senior design project, which then I had to haul out of a basement and ship to someone. So that was great. As far as the PPE effort on Bucknell's campus, we're in the middle of central Pennsylvania. We have kind of 2, for our area, large hospitals. And so we went to them and said, okay, what is it you folks need? What can we do? Because we have tons of people here who want to help. We have faculty, we have a handful of students who are still on campus. What can we do? What are you in need of? And there was some back and forth there, and it came back that there were kind of, 3 real things that folks were interested in. I think they were interested in ventilators. They were interested in face shields and intubation tents. And so I kind of sat in and would kind of volunteer to go to campus when people said, okay, I finished my next iteration of this design. I need this laser cut, or I need this 3D printed. So I'd run to campus and I would, crank something out, and then I get to fulfill my lifelong dream to be a bike messenger. I'd hop on my bike and take something to someone's house. So I was ferrying some parts back and forth. The ventilator design, we started off looking at the project MIT was working on. They had kind of put their plans up. So we started off there. And then someone at Bucknell, I think, knew someone at Sloan Kettering, and we kind of switched gears and moved on to the design that Sloan Kettering is working on. In the end, it turned out that our hospitals, again, because we're kind of more rural, did not see the influx that a lot of other places did. So fortunately, they kind of said, okay, you know what, you can hold off on the ventilators. What we did end up producing a lot of were these intubation tents. And this was a pretty basic design. It was essentially some PVC pipe built into a frame, and then some heavy duty clear plastic that you could kind of drape over it. And the idea here is that, people in the ER can put these shields over top of people when they're intubating them with a ventilator or something else, and prevent aerosols from coming back and hitting the physicians. So we probably produced a few dozen of those to get to the hospitals. And then same thing with the face shields. It was interesting to watch. I jumped on Slack there. They created a Slack channel for us. And so there was lots of traffic going on there in March and on into April. And towards the end of April, it kind of tapered off. And I realized one day, this is kind of fallen by the wayside. I guess all the hospitals in our area, they must have everything they need. And so that, I kind of shelved that and I moved on to do some other things. And then at the end of May, I got an email from our Office of Accessibility. Because they needed some face shields. They've got 1 or 2 students that are coming back to campus in the fall who have some difficulty hearing, and so they want to make sure that they're prepared. They can have people protected while also allowing for lip reading to be possible. So it was nice to see these face shields have a second life here. Post, oh my God, we need these right now, and now they're going on and having a second life. So it was nice I got to create a few more for another purpose.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. Sure.
Oh, yeah, just Matt mentioned students a couple of times, and I just want to chime in that not all students went home. Some students don't have a place to go. Speaking of equity issues, we have international students who have been unable to go home because of flight and travel situations. And our Makerspaces turned out to be a real godsend to those students when campus closed down around them.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think there's 2 things. Does this change in any way your own view or your institution's view of what the Makerspace is for? But also here we are, early July. You have to be thinking about what happens a month from now or 2 months from now, depending on when you might reopen. Not just the Makerspace, but the school. But I'm kind of interested in particular, like Matthew Wettergreen and Niti, when you're working with students, let's just presume that's going to be some kind of hybrid model here into the fall. How is this going to work? And what are you've had some months to, in a sense, you had a taste of it in March, April, but you've had a little time to think about it. What are you thinking about how you're going to conduct your work or your teaching?
Matthew, you want to go
Matthew,
first?
maybe first to you.
No,
and
please,
anybody.
Niti, go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more than before, we have to be agile with anything we put in the so-called system, which we will resume to opening up back again. And for me, I think securing the sense of community, which is generated between students throughout the year is something which I want to keep it impactful. And it is going to be challenging to be incoming students who are very new and who are not going to be putting foot on the campus to get them kind of be part of this whole community. Like, this is what happens in the lab. Then, you know, everyone goes home, there are still things happening inside, and how do you get them? But I feel there's also this hope of like including a lot more people than we used to before. So for example, this fall when New York public schools went into lockdown, our K-12 team on campus and I were able to design this 10-week online PBL workshop. And we kind of piloted it with the third grade PS86 in Bronx. And while I wait for this group of students to log on Zoom and then Google Meet, I was able to give them a virtual tour because sometimes I would teach them from the Maker Lab as I was in the lab. And these third graders' eyes just went blown away. They were like, where are you? What is this? And I feel like there's so much more. We can bring a lot of different diverse community into the space by being outward. So if I had a chance to be inside the space teaching out of that, I think we can kind of create those learning tools which will allow people to almost have a live YouTube channel as a class. I don't know, it's more like a radio video session, which will happen in learning and teaching in a small appetite. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Okay, Matthew?
So I've made 3 big decisions that I think will help me in the fall and may help others. The first one is to repeat, but also expand on the strategy that we used for prototyping in the spring, and that's to basically mail out supplies if necessary. But that also goes with using a virtual scavenger hunt. And so everybody can do a scavenger hunt in their homes and catalog what they have, and then that might help to understand sort of how to change challenges or how to mail out select items. The second thing is to
swap meet.
A swap meet, right? The second thing is to just be realistic and reduce the expectations on the ultimate fidelity of the prototypes. We are not going to achieve medium or high fidelity prototypes if we do not have access to a makerspace. So I'm going to reduce my expectations for the fidelity of prototypes, and I'm going to increase my expectations for design intention and planning and researching materials and trying to describe what the prototype would be if they could build it. And then finally, I'm going to heavily rely on virtual tools for collaboration and communication. So Zoom rooms work perfectly for teams to work over long periods of time, but there's also collaborative CAD packages like Onshape, which can allow teams to work in the same sort of space while pushing and pulling on their design in a virtual way. And then I'll try and use simulation for as well.
That's great, thank you. Anyone else have thoughts along lines how their own teaching work with students might change next fall?
Yeah,
Amit? Or Alan, go on.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah, no, thinking along many of the same lines, what I'm going to be able to do, what's not going to be realistic. My real nightmare scenario is that we close early, because for us, it's very important to establish team norms. The reason we were successful in concluding our projects when everybody went remote in the spring was they, had 6 months of working closely together, establishing team norms and building trust. And so I'm really spending a lot of time thinking through what's going to happen if we are forced, because of external circumstances, to close campus and send people home again early on in the semester. And I'm afraid I don't have any answers for that yet. But
so you're talking about the social side of this, the collaboration, the getting to know each other, the team building, that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely, because the rest of it, at least in my experience, is possible because of the trust that's built up and the fact that people become accountable to each other. And without that, it's very difficult to make remote things work. And so that's what I'm really struggling with thinking through right now.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about, to that point, Alan, the entering students, right? So I know a lot of colleges or universities have been thinking about like, what is a first year experience? Because, just your entry into college and being exposed to, your courses, understanding what the social norms are and just the norms in general around, learning, getting access and familiarity with tools, right? So I think this becomes a lot easier if you already are, like if you're a senior, right? And you've already been at the institution, you're used to how things go, you understand all the terminology. But I think about, what does this look like for the sort of the cornerstone experience that starts out, in engineering, or that introduction to engineering, or introduction, to any course, design, art, anybody else who might come into a makerspace. And how are you guys approaching that? And does anyone have any thoughts about, that sort of introductory experiences? I think while there's a lot of tools out there, there's a lot to learn if you're not used to it. And college is already scary enough when you go the first time.
Well, I can speak a little bit on the facility side, and Matthew built our freshman design program, and he could talk a little bit. But as a facility, we understand that part of our job is to train the students on how to use this equipment to be successful in their projects. And we have training videos and exercises and some in-person workshops and things to train them that are like extracurricular outside of what their academics calls for. But what we've decided to do is like take it even further. So for example, like if the students get sent home midway and they're still trying to design something, maybe virtually or whatever, they still need to know how to design for a piece of equipment or a tool so that they're designing it well, even though they might not actually be making it. And so we're gonna like ramp up our training videos and sort of like in a way that we'll have some live streaming demos. We might, spin it a little bit so that, for example, if Matthew has his students still design based on what it would be to have a 3D printed part that also has a CNC part that also has some electronics, how can we sort of still train them on those equipment? Because the faculty are going to focus on the actual like design part and how it works together, but we often will focus on how you use the equipment specifically. So no, it's not ideal. I think I have to preface everything that I talk to the faculty that this is temporary. So this is not forever. We're doing the best we can with the tools that we're given. We also have a few things. So if the students are able to come back, it's still going to be quite difficult to train with using physical distancing. So some of our ideas are to have GoPro cameras and screens up high where they can watch the technician's hands and what they're doing, but they can stand like 6 feet away. I don't know if that's going to work, but it's definitely something that we're willing to try to sort of like think a little bit outside the box about how these students can like watch, because they're normally looking over our shoulders, right? And so that's one idea that we had, physical tools. Matthew?
I was going to say, oh, sorry.
Amit, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so on what Amy was mentioning, we were thinking on similar lines about having some of the training processes done either virtually or have some of that recorded or live view where the technician is working and other students could follow. We do that for our CNC training processes, but now we are going to extend that for some of our things like 3D printers, laser cutters. One of the things I haven't heard that I wanted to add was being a top tier research institute, most of the times, most of our research faculty feel like they own the makerspace, like they have a research project, so research should take priority, right? And they sometimes don't necessarily understand that makerspaces have a different mission and not necessarily to build the gadget that their research project does. So that's a matter of communication that we have to handle. But what we are trying to do in those kind of scenarios is that we are saying that we will be opening the invention studio at reduced hours with limited capacity, ensuring enough social distancing. But during the first half of the semester, you need to get trained. Only then those trained people could use during the later half. Our philosophy has always been it's open door policy. You want to get trained on the last day of the semester so you can use the tool next semester? Fine, you're welcome. But we are changing that policy because what we see at the data patterns is start of the semester, students are not that stressed, very little usage. Towards the end of the semester, as soon as you hit spring break or fall break, the utilization just ramps up. So we are looking into changing the messaging and making sure that those who need training come earlier so then they could end up using the tools later on. To something about what Alan mentioned of tools, teams, this semester I'm teaching a capstone design class, entirely remote, all online. Students haven't met each other physically at all. And so some of the things we tried to do was to have the social meetings before the start of the semester, like this hangout meetings or town halls. And then we try to make sure that when they have team meetings, either with me or other faculty, they talk something about their life outside of just the work. Because the saying, at least it goes in our design curriculum, is if you're only meeting a person for work, you will end up hating the person for the rest of your life. But if you're meeting them for fun and you're talking about things outside of work, you'll probably build a better friendship. So we try to remind the students that, yeah, we are not in normal times. These are crazy times. Make sure you're sharing about your life as well. So things have been going well so far with our teams, but
it reminds me, of a story. Vision Studio, Dr. Craig Forrest, I really started it at Georgia Tech. It was one of the first university makerspaces that I knew about and visited. And he wouldn't actually let me quote this in the story, but he said the couch was the most a valuable piece of equipment in the makerspace. And his point was that a lot of engineering students, used the space socially, and they met each other and got to know each other, and that meant a lot. It wasn't just their equipment. So I think that is this hard part. It really is the kind of mixing and mingling of people to get to know each other and work together productively. Let me, Jacob, I have a question from one of the panelists, and I'll throw it your way. I know you're an engineering program, so I think it's just, do you have any plans to engage students online that are not engineering students? And how have you maintained community with non-engineering students?
Well, that's really tough. One thing that I'm not sure if UCLA is more restrictive than other universities, but the guidance that we have from the powers that be is that for labs, students are supposed to have 250 square feet of space. And so basically what that means is that I can only have 3 or 4 kids in there at a time. And so that's
I think she said on engaging students online that are
right.
outside, maybe outside the space.
So that means that we're not going to have anything in person.
Right.
And so most of what we've been doing for formal offerings have all been like super hands-on design classes. And so there's really only been one class that we can offer virtually, and that's a microcontrollers kind of class. And so other than that, I don't really know what we're going to do. I think that basically we're just sort of hoping that things are going to get better because all of our previous structure, the whole point of this whole makerspace was let's be in person, let's collaborate together, let's make stuff with our hands. And, with the exception of computer programming and maybe a little bit of electronics, you can't do that off-site.
Yeah. Good point, but not all of you are engineer. Alan, I know you're from an engineering background, but it's a multidisciplinary space and you said there are multiple spaces at Bucknell, so you are mixing different disciplines.
Yeah, that's very important to us because of our liberal arts mission is to try to bring people together. Our university is providing guidance on, basically what we're allowed to do. We also are getting guidance from the state. Pennsylvania has been pretty good about that. And that's what we're using to think about opening the spaces. We're going to be at reduced capacity. We're going to have a lot more time to disinfect and clean. And if the guidance changes, then we'll change our policies. But, for us, it is important to have a space students can go to between classes. Somebody once told me that meetups and makerspaces go together. And having a space for those meetups where students can come together, and our spaces are open 24/7. We have card access and security cameras, and some other sort of equipment access things we've built that allow it to be open 24/7. And I think in the years we've been open, Matt can correct me on this, we've really, I don't even have to, take off my shoes to be able to count the incidents that we've had in any of our spaces. And so we're going to continue that policy, but really enforce the social distancing.
Right. Now, I wanted to say that someone's questions on YouTube, you guys can see on Panelists. I don't think any of you are talking about endangering students and putting them near each other. It'll either be, some form of social distancing, or the makerspace won't be used at all. And I think we're trying to negotiate what does it look like if you can't have access to the makerspace. And as Jacob said, if you can only put 4 people in there, not everybody can have their usual access to it. So I don't think schools are going to force that. Dorothy, did you have a question? It looked like you.
Yeah, no, I was just, one of the things I was thinking about and hearing Alan was, this idea of an innovation space, right? So we've invested, universities and colleges have spent so many dollars, building up maker spaces as innovation spaces, either, that are transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, single discipline in many cases where there's multiple maker spaces, creating sort of this innovation ecosystem. And I think we put so much time and investment in the physical spaces, and it just made me think about, how does that transform, right? So what does an innovation space look like when you don't actually have the space part, right? And how do you create an environment that's still innovative, still as collaborative, right? We spend a lot of time building spaces, like you said, putting the couch in so that students feel comfortable engaging with one another, encouraging them, as Amit just said, trying to share, your own personal stories with each other, that those friendships that are built over those long nights of building, that we've all had in college and in university. And so I think it's just interesting to think about, how do we create that? Because that is, that's really what the crux of this question is how do we recapitulate that in a way that allows for innovation, not just individually, but the collective sort of, I have an idea. Oh, wait, I have an idea. And I think, a lot of you spoke to some tools that we have, including the Zoom rooms. But it was sort of a free form thinking about well, how does this evolve? And are there going to be new tools that are developed coming out of this? Amit, I think you had a remark.
Yeah, yes. So several 2-3 years ago, when I used to go to these conferences on makerspaces, there would be some small booth about AR and VR and makerspaces, and I would think, who would use that? Just use the tools. Why do you need AR? And now all of that sudden seems like maybe there was a value over there. But some of the things what we are trying to do, to my earlier point about research trying to use the invention studio, and we saying, well, this is really a hands-on learning space. What we are trying to say is, at least for the 3D printers, where it requires users to touch multiple places, we don't want to risk students. We'll only allow our student staff to use the 3D printers. But instead of us becoming a job shop where you just upload the file and we print it for you, the requirement is you have to set up a virtual office hour, like a meeting time with a student staff who will go over your application, discuss other manufacturing techniques. And only if you convince that student, then can you get your part printed. So it's not just it is free in the sense you don't pay for materials as a student of tech, but the cost is you have to spend time with a trained user to explain your application. Because many times we see students can make things from a laser cutter or a waterjet, but they would prefer 3D printing because it has that hype with it. And so that's kind of a forced measure to ensure that students still have this sort of a community and they are talking with each other in a virtual setting. So it's not like they just send parts and somehow parts come out. But that's just one thing we are doing for the 3D printers.
Yeah. But Dorothy, one of the things that I think we're seeing that, at least even in community maker spaces, is it's actually the network of people that become, the innovators here. And I think that goes back to some of the things that were talked about earlier, is how do you get to know people, other than bumping into them in the makerspace? How do you get to know what they do, what they like, that conversation I had today with UK makers, that it was sort of a lot of members in a makerspace. They knew what jobs they did, what backgrounds they had, and they could tap on each other for help. Let me ask Amy a question. How is your job going to change, or has it changed? As an executive director of OEDK, as a looking towards the fall.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, for me, as many of you are probably the same, it's a little nuts because we're coming up with our reopening plans, our reactivation plans. How are we going to do this? What's our plan B? What do you do if a student has COVID and has been in the lab? Like, what's the procedures for coming with that? And so there's been a lot of writing and a lot of meetings with different, engineering, safety and facilities people and the police department about being able to, we're 24/7 as well. And we want to reduce our hours, but we also want to be able to, spot check cameras to see if there's compliance when there isn't people there. It's been a little tricky with the the administrative staff. So we're like working that out. But another thing that we do is our lab is funded by donations. A huge portion of my job is development. And so how do we convince donors to continue to sponsor these projects, have clients continue to do projects where they retain the IP and things like that in this climate, in the economic climate. So I've been real busy. My job has definitely shifted, but it's been a little nuts. But it's a little concerning. What do you do with your technicians if there's no students in there? Well, we're going to ramp up our training videos. Like, we're just shifting sort of.
That's great.
And sharing duties, and everyone's sort of coming up with new ways to do things so that we can still support the programming, which is so important.
Yeah, Christine Keenan, are all of your schools planning to open the campuses in the fall, or is it still open question? Maybe thumbs up if you're opening. Okay, Jacob.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
We're hybrid.
Okay. Yeah, I think it could change tomorrow, right?
I think they're planning to allow freshmen and seniors to.
Okay. I'm sorry, Jacob, you broke up a bit. You're allowing freshmen? We missed your comment there, Jacob.
Freshmen and seniors, yeah.
Freshmen and seniors. Oh, that's interesting. Poor sophomores and juniors. No place to go.
Right.
Yeah. Alan, this one idea, you mentioned you do capstone design projects. I've always often thought, that, this might help universities also be a little bit more outward facing with student work, both in reaching the community for problems, but also in terms of sharing the work that students are doing. If it's going to be recorded in a Zoom session, your presentation, well, it's not just another step to put that on YouTube and make that available. So I don't know, there could be some benefits of students actually learning to work more publicly, at least at some point.
No, I completely agree with that. One of the things we found as we quickly transitioned to online is because each of our teams has a mentor from the company that's sponsoring their project. The mentors were invaluable in helping not just teach the students, but teach us about cultures where a lot of interaction takes place remotely, because we really are supported by a lot of Fortune 500 companies that have wide global operations. And the mentors were used to working with people all over the world in different time zones, and really gave the students a lot of advice. I thought that was a really valuable experience. Yeah. And in my own thinking, I'm thinking a lot, how do we keep that aspect that turned out to be really successful and make it more transparent to people how, the Makerspace isn't just a place to come and hang out with your buddies. It's a central point that allows things to happen that couldn't otherwise. But most of that, as Dorothy said earlier, is social. It's being empowered. It's understanding what you can do, and not as much requires the real physical part. We tend, I think, often to overestimate that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Niti, how are you? I don't know that you're teaching in the fall, so this may not be the right question, but part of your class is to work a lot with the outside community. a lot of health related issues. You know, how does that change? I mean, I guess you can do some of that through Zoom, but a lot of it is sort of gaining the trust of people who have problems to share with you and documenting that. And it's a little bit tough, especially if they're not very connected, you know, internet connected people to begin with.
Yeah, so luckily, because I have had conversation and relationship with the Weill Cornell medicine people and also with the nursing rehab center here in New York City, I've been in touch with these folks, and we have been in constantly kind of going through different iteration, and few things which we are looking at, especially after when we went into the PPE production, is to kind of start a monthly meetup where we are looking at the makerspace situation within the hospitals and teaching hospitals. So we're planning to start like a monthly meetup in the fall where the residents and the incoming first-year medical students can interact with first-year technology students from Cornell Tech, where they can actually think about these ideas in the beginning rather than in a drastic situation where you need PPE and ventilators where they don't have any idea of design and engineering. So what are those? So that's one thing which we are kind of planning to do. And the other thing which we're looking at is kind of cultural design probes remotely to start communications for my spring class. So that will all happen remotely, but it'll be more like sending the kits to people. We are starting with the Kohler long-term rehab center where we'll be kind of communicating with the residents who are, all of them are wheelchair users, and they usually take my class in spring, few of them. So like they're going to be more of a teachers of empathy to us when you don't have an ability to make anyways physically. How do you really make things? So there are these two things which we're trying in the fall with the community.
I love that. That's amazing. That's a really great, like, positive, like, project. I love that.
Yeah. Matt Lamparter, I was kind of, I liked your idea that you're mailing prototypes to students, and seems so old-fashioned in a great way. but I was kind of wondering, has anyone thought about like a makerspace in a box? I mean, it's like, here's a basic kit of things that you have to kind of do your prototype using these components, or at least it's almost like First Robotics and others is here's your starter kit.
And the nice thing is a lot of, at least again, we lean towards the electronics end of making, and so there have been a lot of inroads in that world kind of leading up to the pandemic. So we were in somewhat of a good position, at least for a lot of our ECE courses, having things like that. A lot of people make these little USB based like electronic test and measurement devices where you get a whole benchtop of equipment and a single package for $200. And so you can throw that in there. You can throw kits together.
You know, by the way, if anybody has a list of or items, I'd love to like create an article on that, or say here's, you know, it's kind of the emergency maker kit. You know, that's relatively inexpensive, but it really is true. I think it's going to force us actually to use software a lot more in place of hard tools, even for monitoring, you know, and other things. So, Jacob, have you guys had any work in that area?
Yeah, actually, I teach a microcontrollers class in this past spring, and what that class normally is it is an entire kit in a box.
Yeah.
Where you know, we've got an Arduino, power supply, some basic electronics, breadboard, stuff like that. And normally we do that in person, and we all just sort of build together in class. But then this last spring, the kids picked up those kits before they left, or I would ship it to them. And we did the entire electronics Arduino class over Zoom, and it basically worked exactly the same. The only thing that was different is that there were fewer team projects. So they're all solo projects at the end.
Yeah.
But that worked out pretty.
That's great. Listen, let me just, we're up on the hour here, off the opportunities. Anybody have any closing thoughts? Thank you certainly all for being here today. Amy.
I just have a quick shameless plug. I am part of the Student Shop Managers Consortium, and some of you are aware of it. And they are doing a conference on July 21st. That it's a 4-hour conference that's going to discuss how to reopen these labs and shops safely. We're going to talk about students using PPE, as well as how are you cleaning and disinfecting equipment. We're going to talk about shop operations and how working with university regulations and guidelines in your shop. We're going to talk about different ways to communicate these COVID guidelines to your students and sort of compliance of those guidelines, as well as different ways to teach using physical distancing and virtually. And we've got Harvard School of Design and Case Western and a bunch of different schools, about nine different schools that will be talking about their ways of how they're doing it as examples. So I'm going to throw the link up.
And send me information. I'll put it on the Make blog.
Yeah, and the same for Nation of Makers. Is it open to the public? Because I think a lot of community makerspaces, we've been talking to them, and I think they could also utilize, I mean, we're all kind of going through the same things. And I think there's slightly different lenses, right, in terms of the youth population. But I think a lot of the same questions apply as it relates to safety and sanitation and just concerns in general. So I think any resources are greatly appreciated, and we're happy to get them out on both of our platforms.
Yeah, it is. We just announced it, and I already have 180 registrants. So it's clearly a hot topic that people want to hear what other schools are doing. So I just threw it up there.
Well, that's great. Well, I'll bring this to a close. Thank you, each of you, for participating. It's fascinating to hear from you. It's always good to connect. Thank you for the work you're doing. Hopefully, we'll get these makerspaces reopened someday, but let's not do it until it's the right time. But it's important to keep encouraging students to learn and explore and discover what they can do as makers. Thank you all.
Thank you. Please stay safe.
Thanks, Dale.
Thank you.